What's the most NSFW thing you saw go down at work? Saw my boss and a coworker making out. They were both married at the time. Each came into my office later that day and had a sit-down with me on why these types of things happen. I was 26 years old at the time. Story 2. Had a fire drill at work one night. Attendance was taken and 2 people missing. A couple bosses went back in looking for them. Found them in a storage room having sex. Boss told them to finish up, have a good time, go home, and don't bother coming back. Story 3. First day at a job, and out of nowhere, an employee yells across the office at the boss, "We all know you're cheating on your wife with the secretary." The boss freaked out and started yelling at all of us that his personal life is none of our business. The secretary was crying, and they both left. I was supposed to be training with the boss that day, but because he was gone, we all just went down the street to some Mexican restaurant and drank all day. Pretty cool gig, even if it was very short-lived. Story 4. When I worked at a hotel, one of the housekeepers was known to hook up with guests from time to time. The head housekeeper caught her in the act once, when she was trying to inspect rooms. Story 5. Working part-time at Toys R Us one Sunday. I got a call on the radio to please remove a couple of people from the diaper section. When I got there, I found 2 middle-aged people having sex, and she was pressed against the rack. When I told them to stop, he just turned at me with an offended look while standing fully erect. It was an awkward escort out of the store. Story 6. I was working second shift security in a pharma company, and a line worker came put at the boss's office all disheveled. The boss had gone home already, so I kept watching, and 2 dudes came out of the office a few minutes later. One was still putting his pants back on. They were extremely surprised that the door to her office was on camera. Turns out one of the dudes had stolen a master key from a janitor's cart and had been using the manager's office as a bang pad. Story 7. Work it for a law firm. You'd be astounded how many times I remote into an attorney's laptop, and he just has a straight-up adult film folder on the desktop. Story 8. Caught 2 employees had sex in a laser tag arena supply closet with an arena full of children and the game running. I've seen poop on the ceiling. The ceiling. Story 9. I worked as a janitor at a hospital. There was a private restroom on the 2nd floor. On multiple days, someone positioned themselves above the toilet and took a dump all over it. It turned out to be a janitor on 2nd shift. Story 10. Watched someone get burned, blow up, night shift in the winter about 4 years ago. He needed to preheat a piece of steel, so he turns on the gas, but goes away for 30 seconds to find his flint striker and comes back and makes the spark. Had 3rd-degree burns on most of his body. Came back 3 months. Story 11. I had a coworker that took massive amount of substances on busy construction sites, to the point he would sway around and barely keep his feet. The company knew, but was so desperate for workers, they turned a blind eye and never did anything about it. Crap company. Couldn't keep anybody longer than a year, except this guy. Had many close calls on the sites, and somehow never died. One day, he just drove off a site in the middle of the day. The company trucks were GPS tracked, so they found him OD'd in it in the shady part of town. Story 12. Back in the 90s, I worked at a car wash. Across the alley from the car wash was a small condo with a balcony facing us. One day, a guy had sex his girlfriend from behind on the balcony facing us. We started to notice after a while, and as we pointed and showed more co-workers, their tempo increased, and then they finished. And we cheered them on. Story 13. Wasn't there, narrowly leaving before this. 30 assistant manager at Burger King had post-close B-Day party at BK. Most of us were high schoolers besides her, and 1 or 2 others. Last 3 people at this party are her and 2 18-year-old guys I knew well. She had an MMF threesome with both of them at the BK. She was also engaged. Cameras captured pretty much all of the event. I came in the next morning to the general manager explaining what had happened and that we had 3 new openings. Story 14. Cinema usher, end of the night and waiting for final films to finish and clear up. One guy was sitting in the back row. We would be standing at the front to the side, watching the credits. It is not uncommon for this, but the end credits finish, and he is still there. I begin to walk up the stairs towards him, and he hasn't noticed me, and I can make out he looks like he's asleep. As I get closer, he suddenly looks at me and mouths something. Another head pops up from his lap. Another guy had been going to downtown with him. I instantly froze, turned around, and walked back down to the exit. They rather sheepishly left a few minutes later. I thanked them for their visit and hoped they enjoyed the movie. Story 15. I worked for U-Haul about 11 years ago, and the location was behind a sketchy ass club that changed ownership constantly from lawsuits and crap. I came in one Saturday to open, and my manager was late, so I was alone. I get inside, start pulling the displays out to the showroom and crap, and I hear a loud ass bang on the front door. Scared the crap out of me. I look over and there's a naked girl out there crying and begging me to let her in. I grabbed a moving blanket to cover her and called the cops. She was covered in her own crap. Turns out she got high at the club that night and got gang abused and left out there passed out. When she came to, she came running to the first place she saw, which was U-Haul. Story 16. I did not see the event, only the aftermath. But when the Filene's in the mall where I worked was bought out, changing its sign to Macy's. A worker was electrocuted and passed. At first, malmanagement tried to stay open, but the police forced them to close for the day. Possibly a rumor only, but I later heard that the Filene's, Macy's manager, had insisted that the electrician work the sign hot. Story 17. Back when I was a singer, the conductor, who was also my music theory teacher, in our choir, had a heart attack right in front of me in the middle of the chapel. He was always quite a joker, so when he collapsed, I thought he was making an elaborate joke out of how bad our singing was. But seconds later, I realized he was unconscious and was groaning. He passed on the scene. Story 18. I see some people posting work-related injuries on here, so I'll share mine. I used to work in the kitchen at a fine dining restaurant. We were supposed to say oven door whenever we would open it, especially if someone had their back turned to you. The guy that I worked with was super shy to the point of not saying things when he should, and so he didn't tell me that he opened the door behind me. I turned around with a handful of trays, and my arm smacked right into the door. It was so hot that I didn't even realize that I got burned until I pulled my arm away. And my skin was still on the door. He never apologized for it, and I got real sick of seeing his guilty puppy dog look that he would give me every day for the rest of the time that I worked there. Story 19. I was a bartender working at a popular Fiscadelic drug-themed pizza chain in my college town. Guy sat at the bar for about 30 minutes, and we talked about music and playing guitar, and he just seemed like a super nice, cool guy. Then he was like, "I'm going to grab a table and eat now. Good talking to you." Left a solid tip. But what he really meant was, "I'm going to go sit in a booth and stare in that table of girls while I pleasure myself under the table now." And that's what he did. Luckily, the girls immediately and loudly called him out, and we ran him off. We heard rumblings around town of the same thing happening at several other spots. Story 20. To work at a library, and there was a homeless guy who came in every other day, and he used to drunkenly piss his pants while sitting on the upholstered chairs. It got to the point to where we were replacing the chairs since the smell sunk in, and we ended up banning him for a year. Story 21. Used to work at a hotel, and weird things started to happen several times a week. Doors crazy glued shut, bars of soap missing from housekeeping. Turns out the janitor was the source of the issues. He was going to the top floor of a 14-story building and beaming people with the bars of soap. Got caught when he knocked out some teeth of a pedestrian. Story 22. I used to work at a museum. We had a strict zero food policy in the museum galleries. There was an interactive kids exhibit in one of our rooms about nocturnal creatures, and there was a little campfire corner with an actual camping tent set up. I was making rounds one day, and all of a sudden, I hear this munching sound coming from the tent. It literally sounded like someone was loudly chewing oatmeal in there, me not even thinking about it twice. I popped my head right into the tent, ready to say something along the lines of, "Excuse me, food items aren't allowed in the..." With horror, I realized the origin of the sound wasn't some kid eating snacks, but a fully grown couple aggressively making out with each other with tongue and drool and everything. All I could do was freeze. I happened to look down, and the woman do BJ off by palming him over his jeans without a care in the world. All of this inside a campfire tent in a kid's nocturnal creatures exhibit. I was too shook to tell them to go, so I went to find the nearest maintenance worker we had working. He was an ex-military sergeant in his 60s. He gave them one hell of a speech. I was in shock the whole time, but highly entertained. Story 23. Woman pulled up behind our building. We had on-site security and lots of cameras. She stops, gets out, drops her pants, and craps behind the building. Security goes out to ask her WTF she's doing. She scoops her mess up with napkins and drives away. Our office was near a mall and an interstate highway. There were restaurants and fast food everywhere. There was no reason for her to do that behind our building. Story 24. Working a SA raft guide on a beginner's trip with moms and kids and grandparents. A girl swimming in the creek along our route flashed her boobs to all the rafts as we floated by. And 0 tips were given to the guides because somehow this was our fault. Story 25. Guy came into work very late, back office for a bank, with 2 black eyes and completely beaten up. In front of everyone and quite loudly said it was his girlfriend, but "You think I'm bad? You should see her." He was being serious too. Someone also caught him doing a line in the office toilet before he started work that day too. Story 26. I'm a teacher. Our smart boards are linked to our computers, but you can freeze what's on the board so the students can do the work and you can check emails, do registers, etc. One guy thought he'd frozen the board and proceeded to sext his missus over email during a lesson. He was at least smart enough to use his personal email, but he was dumb enough to not check the board was actually frozen. Result was students photographing the rather scandalous emails and Snapchatting them to each other. I work on a different site, and within 2 hours it was all over my site as well. The guy no longer works for us. Story 27. I did not see it, but it was recorded. We have cameras. 2 sets of kids, 16 years old, decided to have sex in the front row of a movie theater. At the same time while the movie was running, with people in the rows above them. They were wondering what we should do about the footage. I said to leave it. Don't look and it will go away in 30 days. Some states have laws about deleting evidence of a crime, so I let the system take care of it automatically. The kids were shamed by police and parents. Police were called, and so were the parents. The kids acted like it was no big deal. Story 28. I studied medicine in El Salvador, and during my surgical rotation, we saw a low of weird crap. This one time, an ambulance brought two drunk guys who had been fighting, because one had said that pork pupusas were better than cheese pupusas. Pupusas are a local dish. The other guy took offense and attacked. Both drew their machetes and hit each other up. Story 29. I worked at McBananas way back in the day. One of the nighttime janitors was named Frankie. He was a Quebecer with a dirty sense of humor, so we got along well. One night shift, I was washing dishes in the back while Frankie changed one of the grease traps. He slipped on the wet floor and dropped the boiling grease all over himself. This was all directly in front of me, like some of the grease splattered on my crappy vinyl work shoes, ruining them. It was ducked. Never heard somebody scream like that in my life. Literally, hot grease all over him, head to toe. Because it was a grease burn, we had to take all of his clothes off so that it didn't melt into his skin. Pretty sure the 911 operator told us to do this, but it may have been the quick-thinking manager. Anyway, poor Frankie, covered in grease burns, cursing like a git, stripped down to his tighty whities. Had to wait for some paramedics to arrive and treat him, and I ducked off out of there a little after midnight. He recovered and eventually became the nighttime manager at a Walmart McBananas. I used to see him all the time afterwards, and he seemed to have recovered well. No scars on his face anyway. Story 30. I had to mediate an intra-office issue where employee A refused to interact with employee B in any sense after they had a bad date. This wouldn't be a big deal, but it is healthcare and cooperation is necessary. Employee A is furious that employee B walked out in the middle of their date and said that he was humiliated just looking at her. Employee B basically agreed to be professional at work and admitted that she wouldn't have walked out of the date except she was in shock. At this point, we're a little concerned that whatever shocked her might be a liability to us, so we take them and talk to them separately. Employee A has no idea what we're talking about. Employee B wants to be discreet but eventually tells us, apparently the date was going well, so they decided to skip the movie and go back to employee A's place after dinner. He pulls a, "let me go get more comfortable," while employee B waits in the living room. Employee A comes out in head-to-toe adult baby clothes, diapers included, and hands her a strap-on. In actual baby talk voice, he told her what acts he wants her to do to him. His kinks were never discussed beforehand. Let me tell you, taking notes on that entire situation in a way that could be disseminated to the President of Human Resources was a task. Story 31. I've worked at a country club for a long time, and there is always scandalous crap going down. Housekeeper was ducking the maintenance man in the laundry room. A member walked into the bathroom and witnessed a man giving another man a BJ. The beverage cart girl was flashing her new boob job to men for tips. The latest hot-off-the-press story was two co-workers were having a threesome with a member and took pics on his phone. Wife found them, sent them to the GM, two co-workers fired on the spot. Plenty more stories, but those are the top ones. Story 32. Not at work, but on cadet camp. I came into the accommodation building to grab a bottle of water and saw my friend and a female cadet from another school ducking on the bed next to mine. I told her that she looked pretty, grabbed my bottle, and went out like nothing happened. Only myself, my friend, and her know about this, and they're in a full relationship as of writing. Story 33. I work at a grocery store around my neighborhood. I was restocking a shelf, feminine products, when I came across a used tampon full. I had to clean it up, and my coworkers all thought it was pretty funny. Keep in mind, I am female, and I understand needing to change your tampon, but please, for the love of all that is holy, use the restroom that is provided for you. Story 34. Coworkers on substances having sex on the prep table in the back at a Subway. We were open until 4 a.m. There was one occasion where a coworker brought in speakers, blacklights, and strobes, and we basically had a rave. We made sandwiches with our shirts off that night for customers. Man, I have a lot of stories from that time. Story 35. Not really NSFW, but more a public display of affection issue. At the grocery store where I worked in high school, two of the adult supervisors started a relationship. As I was coming on shift, so was the female supervisor. We met her boyfriend at the time clock as he was clocking out and we were going in. They stopped to say hi and smooch each other for a minute. Just then, the owner's wife, who also worked there for some reason, came around the corner and saw them. She said, "Excuse me, you're both on my time." The male supervisor, who was one of the best workers they had, straight up looked at her and said, "I'm so done with your crap." Dude walked out and never came back. Biggest, ballsiest move I've ever seen. Story 36. When my now husband was just my boyfriend and we were young, stupid kids, we worked at Taco Bell together. We were closers and worked late night, just the two of us and one manager mostly. Safe to say a lot of NSFW stuff went down whenever the manager stepped out. Story 37. Some of the guys I used to work with dropped acid at the company 4th of July BBQ. We're all sitting around the fire, waiting for the very conservative company president to start the grill. And Josh pulls out a small piece of paper and starts taking pieces off and handing them out to his work friends. It was a landscaping company, and they never had the brightest or cleanest employees. Story 38. I worked in a kitchen at a hotel that had a ballroom for events. We hosted a sorority's spring formal or something, and it got pretty crazy. There were people having sex everywhere. There was a private set of lockable bathrooms in the hallway by the pool, and we kept having to yell at couples to get out of them. One of my coworkers was a Mormon kid who wouldn't drink caffeine, but he walked into a closet, and a girl was riding a dude on the floor. She kept the door closed while maintaining motion as people tried to pry the door open to get them out, people doing it behind the dumpster outside. When I finally left, there was a couple doing it in the car next to mine. We also hosted father-daughter dances for older teenagers, which was super weird. Female coworkers informed us that the daughters were patting their bras in the bathrooms, not sure who their intended audience was. The mother-son dances weren't much better. The mothers would rank the sons on a hot scale. Oh, and they sold alcohol at both. Imagine a bunch of old dudes hanging around drinking beer, watching their daughters twerk on each other. Story 39. Small company holiday party. The hot woman in marketing hooked up with the wife of one of her male coworkers in the bathroom. Both came out licking their lips. She then went home with the couple. Story 40. My old boss used to bring us giant drinks with crowns and Coke in them at like 10 a.m. We would wind up wasted by 2 p.m. We worked in manufacturing. Definitely not safe, but we all made it out alive. Story 41. Showing my age, but as a 15-year-old, I got a job pumping gas, cleaning windshields, remember Back to the Future. You'd be surprised at even then how many women showed their private parts, all acting as if they didn't know. Story 42. Actually, this did happen to me. A few years ago, the wife and I went to a clothing optional resort. Toward the end of our stay, a young lady came up and said she was the housekeeper. I'm naked. She's clothed. She was always looking down at the ground. It didn't dawn on me until later that she was asking for her tip to clean our room. I still feel bad about not tipping her. Story 43. A mountain lion appearing in the parking lot, blocking the way into the office building. Definitely not safe to get out of your car and go into the building to work. Literally not safe to work. Story 44. I was on the toilet minding my own business while suddenly I noticed the shadow on the stall beside me moving awkwardly. Then I realized that the guy beside me was Pleasure himself and I could see his junk as a shadow on the floor. That guy was famous for taking long trips to the bathroom. Now I know why. Story 45. I worked at a Planet Fitness in the past. I guess some guy was taking a shower, slipped, hit his head, and suffered a really bad concussion. He had no idea what was going or on. And next thing we know, he comes out of the locker room and is walking around the gym butt-ass naked. It was quite the situation. Story 46. I worked janitorial at a university and was on the early morning shift. It was normally pretty quiet, 4:30 a.m., with few people around. One morning, I went to get onto an elevator and there were two people having vigorous sex. There was that awkward moment of us staring at each other as the door stayed open for a few seconds and then closed again. I had a good laugh, then went about my work thinking little of it. Fast forward 3 years. I meet this girl and start dating her. After a few months, we end up going on a camping trip and we were going to meet a few of her friends out there. When we arrive at the campsite, there was a second awkward moment as I recognized the couple from the elevator and they recognized me. When my GF went introduced us, the three of us almost simultaneously said, "We've met." When my GF asked when and how we met, we just burst out laughing and ended up telling the story. Small world. Story 47. Pretty tame by all accounts. But when a colleague of mine put in his 2 weeks notice, one of the HR ladies, yes, HR, came over to his desk and said she was sorry to see him go and all the usual stuff. Then she bizarrely basically gives him a lap dance at his desk. Yes, again, woman from HR who should know better. Story 48. I saw my coworker end on our supervisor. They were at my desk too, which was super gross to me because I don't want to sit on someone else's splooge all day. I got to the point where I hid an extra chair in the back hallway because I know they didn't clean up. Story 49. Was interviewing 2 partners, one male, one female, of a company I was interning for. The man was talking about the history of starting the company and started with, "When we started this company, I was ducking many women, one of whom was my wife and one of whom is sitting in this room." He then proceeded to go on a tangent about how he was a big junk-swinging asshole Lothario in his youth who could get the job done, but had improved and turned into a nicer person. He hadn't. The poor female partner looked like she was about to hit him. Unfortunately for her, they had definitely been sleeping together when starting the company. She asked me to leave, and then I was called into a meeting a few hours later. He had been scolded hard by the female partner. He sheepishly asked me to keep that meeting between us and to tell no one. Oh well, here I am. Story 50, didn't see but experienced. Ducked my boss's daughter in the bathroom while I was on the clock. 18-year-old me was a little more daring than I am now. Story 51, in the Navy, a puppet show. This is when someone is in their rack with their curtains shut, but the light is on. They start masturbating, and an outline of what they are doing shows on the rack curtain. Alternatively, a guy on my first boat, 96-ish, would place his junk on your shoulder when you were sitting down. I may have grabbed it and gave him a tour of the boat. He didn't do that to me again. Story 52. I worked in an office. We had one employee who would frequently hook up with random coworkers in the stairwells or their cars. It was gross. She would come back bragging, but then would also frequently keep a 2L jug of cranberry juice at her desk. She's now a private party escort. She was accidentally hired a few years after leaving the office to a coworker's bachelor party. Priceless. Story 53. I worked the 3 a.m. graveyard shift in Subway 15 years ago. One of my coworkers I was sometimes paired with did substances before we got around to cleaning. He was a lovely guy and moved away from his dealer to get a fresh start. Hope he succeeded and is still doing well. Heard about a couple who worked in the same one as me, who had sex on the prep bench, but never saw it happen. Story 54. Older guy getting a handy at the bar. Yes. Everyone knew what was happening within a minute. No, they weren't a couple. Yes, they both have significant others that were not there. No, they did not finish. I only saw it as the cook, because my bartender told me to come help her break them up in case there was trouble. I thought she was damn with me, or that it would be hard to tell. Nope, she was tugging him hard enough to make me wince in pain. He was bare-ass, naked with his pants down to his knees, and his forehead was on the bar groaning. This was New Year's Eve, so no one sat outside. Our bar sits 15. We have 3 high tops that sit 2 to 3 people, and 6 low tops that sit 4 to 5. So we can max sit 60 people. We had maybe 30 that night. Most knew both of them and their spouses. Haven't seen her or either spouse since then. Seen him once, told him he was banned, and then had to explain why. Funniest crap I ever saw. Story 55. Some guys were working on a power line in the field next to our office. It was a very windy day, and a metal ladder they had in the bucket for some additional height. Lights flicker, and one of the guys was hanging smoking. Sad thing is, it took hours to get him down. They tried to get some sheets up to hide the body, but because of the windy conditions, they just ended up coming down. Story 56. I had a coworker from the Middle East for a few years in the very early 2000s. He was generally a nice and competent guy, but he certainly liked to brag about his religion and culture. Everything Arabian was obviously superior than anything in the West. Food, culture, music, etc. He also presented himself as deeply religious and would unroll a prayer carpet and start praying in the middle of the shared lab several times a day. He also got out of several projects he didn't like, which involved visual representations of people because Islam allegedly forbids to create depictions of human beings. At one point, I was given his old work computer to use for myself. It had serious performance issues, so I started cleaning it up. Let's just say I was somewhat surprised to find the hard disk filled almost completely with hundreds of adult videos which the colleague had downloaded. It was clearly him. His user ID was assigned, and they were in his home directory. So I guess behind closed doors, depictions of the human body are not so detestable anymore. He also evidently hadn't had any reservations using employer resources for his extensive adult film consumption. Story 57. I was a student, so I wasn't working. But I had a teacher that sent me nudes from her classroom for the 3 weeks leading up to graduation. There's a working overtime joke in there somewhere. I just haven't found it yet. Story 58. Worked downtown Orlando for a startup. We were right across from a fancy brand new high-rise apartment building and about 4 floors up from where our office was. You could see an adult shoot happening. Cameras, lighting rigs, right over the balcony just going at it. Story 59. Didn't see anything happening, but we came into work one Monday and the big, heavy wood conference table had completely collapsed in a way that there had to be some serious shenanigans happening on top of it. Story 60. Was working at an office, warehouse that was adjacent to a car workshop. They repainted cars, among other things. One day, people in our office started feeling dizzy and nauseated. Turns out the car shop had left the door open and the fumes got in. I was superior at the time, so I just sent everyone home. Thankfully, no one took any long-term damage. My boss was pissed. You should have just worked through it. Yeah, thanks. Also worked briefly as a personal assistant at a care facility for special needs youth. I'm talking special. Floppy junks getting out when it was not bath time was a common occurrence. In that field, that's just part of the job, though. A friend of mine worked with Downs adults, and apparently it was like damn Grey's Anatomy at that place. The Downs people did not like wearing clothes, and everyone was getting it on with everyone, anytime, any place. Story 61. When I worked in a call center, a couple cheating in the stairwell. There was penetration involved. Well, about 50 of us saw it, including their respective partners who also worked at the company. Not sure why they did it, and they got fired pretty swiftly, so I didn't see them after that either. Story 62. Coworkers were banging in the office next to mine. They were very enthusiastic about it, so much so that the pictures on my wall kept shaking and rattling. Funny story, the only person who didn't know was the company CEO. He found out they were breaking the rules after he saw them making out on an outbound flight to Vegas that he happened to be on. Turns out they both were very, very sick and needed the week to recuperate. We both informally fired from the company at baggage collection. I also saw someone reach their hand into the fryer at a restaurant when I was in high school. They dropped their tongs into the oil and instinctively reached their hand out to grab them. Unfortunately, they went right into the oil and received a disgustingly brutal burn up to their wrist. Story 63. I worked at a regional pizza chain in high school, early to mid-00s, along with my 3 best friends. We used to have a lot of fun, albeit inappropriate for work. Bong rips in the walk-in freezer, smoking cigarettes in the office when it was cold, shopping cart races in the corridor that ran underneath the strip mall, taking helium rips before answering the phone, buying, selling illicit substances, delivery drivers getting beer for us, etc. The managers were often involved, or at least aware. Story 64. Someone call me? Seriously though, same place. In high school, I worked at one of the local malls. Store gate was down midday when I showed up 15 minutes early for my shift. Opened the gate and walked into the back room to find my manager do substances. A few weeks later, I show up early again, gate down again, open it up and go into the back room to find a coworker blowing a guy from the shoe store across the hallway. Story 65. Was narrowly involved in a very NSFW activity with a coworker. We were friends with benefits for a few months and she was a little unorthodox in the sack. She always wanted to go to the next level. I was recently single when we started, so it was all in good fun to keep my sanity. We worked at a fast food joint, open late nights, and often we closed together, usually when it died down around midnight. You would send the rest of the crew home and have 2 staying late. We were usually the late shift so we could hang out after work. She wanted to do some things that the health unit would certainly not appreciate. I was hesitant and kept saying, no, let's just go back to my place or go for a ride, or hell, let's go in the parking lot for all I care. But at work, there's cameras. We need to clean the freezer, she says. Come with me. Oh no. So I'm a teenage male at that time, who is as active as I possibly can be. And even I know that's a dumb idea. But what's a guy to do? So I go with her to clean the walk-in freezer and she immediately jumps all over me. About 2 minutes go by of just making out, and finally I put an end to it. I explained how if I was a customer, and I knew what was going on in this freezer, I'd never order again. I tried to be very reasonable, and explained my position, and asked if we could pick back up once we closed the store. She freaked. Apparently, by not damn around with her in a walk-in freezer, it means that I am no longer interested. Good times. Story 66. Used to work security at a hospital in South Carolina. We would often have mental health patients in the ER before they were admitted or discharged. One in particular crap on himself and rubbed it all over his body. This dude was about 5 feet 10 in, running through the ER covered in crap head to toe. One of our officers, who was ex-Marines, was about 5 feet 1 inches, think little bulldog energy, picks this dude up mid-sprint and pile drives him onto his face, and then drags him halfway back to his assigned room before realizing he's leaving a crap trail. Our uniforms were also white polos, and this was in the summertime. Dude got called the Turd Wrangler for the longest. Story 67. I edit academic journals that include adult film studies. It's sporadic, but comes up occasionally. My very first day on the job, they didn't really have much actual work for me yet, so they just sat me down with a stack of back issues. I opened some random issue to some random page, and it was a screenshot from an adult film. I can honestly say, though, that I've never looked at adult film on my work computer. That wasn't part of my job. Story 68. How do you move a 10-ton generator? When you don't have a 10-ton forklift, you use 2 forklifts. One 2-ton, one 3-5-ton. When they tip forward, you use an excavator on each to hold their rear wheels to the ground. Actually a great feat of ingenuity and coordination, but not safe for work. Also, my boss lost a bet, so he ended up hanging by his feet from a boom lift, unsecured, head 3 meters above ground, smoking a cigarette. Story 69. Worked in a dining hall at UMadison, and one of the line cooks worked on his 40th birthday, and I guess had a full-on midlife crisis where he came to work drunk and high, got drunker and higher on his cigarette breaks, wandered into a dorm lounge and passed out drunk, then woke up and went into random dorm rooms, tried to steal a MacBook from some kid's desk while other kids from that hall watched and told him to get fo. Then the cops showed up and took him away in embarrassment. He came back the next morning and told the manager, "I'm guessing I'm fired. We never saw that poor git again." Story 70. My job has a stacker, which is like a hand-operated forklift. Instead of sitting in a cab, you move a handle and walk with it. One guy stood on the forks while the other raised him like 20 feet. The stacker stops before the ceiling, so there was no danger of hitting his head, but still very stupid. Story 71. I manage a self-storage facility, so I've seen some weird crap over the years, but this one takes the cake. One day, I was reviewing our security video footage for proof that a tenant had been on the grounds after the posted access hours. I ended up noticing that another person, not a tenant, just some random guy, had wandered into the elevator lobby at around 1 a.m. Nothing unusual. That happens fairly often. This guy walked in, sat down, and started smoking something. He spent the next half hour or so smoke, and seemingly getting more and more agitated. Then it happened. He started taking off his clothes, but not just getting undressed, oh no. He was dancing and peeling his clothes off slowly, twirling each piece around before flinging it aside, totally doing a hot dance. He gets completely naked, then reached into his backpack and pulled out a few things. He pulled on a tiny pair of lacy underwear and some platform shoes and danced around for a few more minutes. Then it got really weird. He reached into his backpack again and pulled out a can of shaving cream and a razor. One at a time, he propped his legs up against the wall and shaved them from his ankles to the tops of his thighs. When he was done, he sprayed some more shaving cream into his hand, pulled out his junk, and stood there vigorously, pleasure himself. He laid down an end on his stomach and rubbed it into his skin. He sat up and started smoking. About an hour later, a cop car pulled into the parking lot. The officer apparently called for backup, and eventually, 3 more cruisers pulled up. They took the guy into custody and drove away. I've cleaned up more disgusting messes at work, but mopping up dried clumps of shaving cream the next morning grossed me out more than anything else I've ever had to clean up. Story 72. A few years ago, the store I worked at was getting a massive remodel, and we were expected to just keep working around the construction guys and stay out of their way. Well, one of our managers was recently divorced and had given herself a mommy makeover as a birthday gift, so she felt pretty good about herself. Good enough to repeatedly get caught with the foreman in various dark corners around the store in various compromising positions. She quit the store a few months after that, and last I heard she was experiencing a midlife crisis in Vegas. Story 73. Not where I worked, but in the 1980s, it was reported in the local alternative newspaper that a manager had responded to an employee getting very worked up during a busy holiday rush by taking him into the back do BJ, and then saying, "All right, now calm down and get on with the job." Because they didn't name the business except what they sold, every store that sold that good was swamped with applications. Story 74. At a previous job, an assistant manager was fired for pleasure himself on the soda in the stockroom. He'd done it several times, but this time was caught on camera. Story 75. I saw an old man eat his poop. He carried it around like a chocolate bar and munched on it. By the time I saw, he was halfway done. I ran to get the proper person to deal with it, but the guy had a habit of touching everything, including other residents. Another day, we had a different gentleman who liked to use the yard as his bathroom. He went to take a crap on the grass, and at that moment, another lady goes up to him and tries to hold his hand as he's got his pants around his feet squatting. The gentleman was nonverbal at this point, so he just started swinging at her to get away. And just to paint the full picture of this crazy 60 seconds, at that same moment, 10 feet away, I was consoling another resident who thought there was a war memorial on the grass because it was 4th of July and we had put American flags. The same gentleman who took a crap on the grass was super combative at night as well, and one night when they were trying to get him to shower, he started swinging at my coworkers and ran away naked. Found him 20 minutes later, completely naked, sitting in the living room. It took another 20 minutes of him fighting with the caregivers before they got him near his room and to put on shorts. Story 76. I have a lot of gross stories, but here's a funny one. In the firehouse, it was always a joke when guys started dating someone that if they pulled a backdraft, having sex in the hose bed on the top of a fire engine. You had to pull all the hose off and clean it. One day we get a call, and our engine had 2 jump seats that faced backwards, one of which was my spot. I'm facing the guy across from me as he's strapping into his C-Bay, and I noticed a pink object hanging off his air rig. I'm sitting here looking at it, and it dawns on me. They were a pair of panties. A very large pair of panties. After the call, I mention it to a few guys, and we find the panties on the floor of the cab. They were obviously dirty, and so we just threw them away, but not before someone took a picture of them. And the incident was laughed about for a while, and we all forgot about it. Until one shift, I realized I left my sunglasses in the engine and went into the engine bay, opened up the cab, and saw a guy on first shift going to town eating out a woman I'd describe as a large, grandmothery woman. She was easily 40 years older than this guy in his early 20s and was really enjoying herself. Of course, they heard me open the door, saw me, and I just grabbed my sunglasses, said, "You to have fun," and left to go drink away that image from my mind. Story 77? It was just dangerous. In my teens, I worked for a paint company on a 2-man crew. We'd drive around to houses and do small paint jobs and such. My buddy drove the truck with all of our paint supplies and stuff in it. One day, we just finished up a job and lunch and headed onto the highway to head home. Like an idiot, I put my cooler box on top of a toolbox in the trailer bed, and it flew out of the back of the truck once we got on the highway. I told my buddy to pull the truck over, and I got out and played real-life Frogger on 4 lanes of highway traffic. I was able to get the lid for my cooler box, as it was only 1 lane away from the pull-off. But the rest of the cooler was 3 lanes away, and when I was ready to make another run out to grab it, a semi ran over the rest of the box with a loud pop sound, and the thing disintegrated. I had to walk back to the truck with a lid and shattered expectations. I'm happy I'm still alive, though. Story 78. A cook and a waitress disappeared for a while we were closing. Someone heard them in a bathroom stall, so we gathered everyone around the bathroom door and waited for them to come out. The guy's mom was one of the managers. It was hilarious. Story 79. Private-owned restaurants are the worst. Many hookups and affairs. Caught the human resources lady blowing the cook in the wine cellar. Was this dishwasher and married waitress who would sometimes have their cigarette break in her car. He always hit on her and she would just laugh it off. Then late after close one day, I saw her giving him front seat sucky action. Story 80. I worked night shift, and we all speculated two of my coworkers were either having a workplace affair or at least contemplating it. Well, one night I decided to go eat lunch in my car, and I walked past them doing it in hers. Story 81. Not that scandalous, but I work in a restaurant that is right down the block from a sex toy clothing shop. We had a couple come in and sit at the bar who forgot their bag from the shop. In the bag was a huge sex toy, one of those big, expensive, fancy ones, some lube, and some clothes. The woman called and asked if the bag was at the restaurant. The guy came and picked it up the next day. It was just so funny. Everyone was watching the bag, wondering if they would have the gonads to come claim it. Story 82. When I worked at a nightclub in NY, the owners let us drink for free all the time, during and after work. The owner's friends would come in to hang out after close. They offered me substances all the time. We always smoked indoors once we were locked up for the night. One of the owners would play really loud Springsteen while he and his friends threw pint glasses at the wall. He always cleaned up after himself. We all got paid mostly in cash tips, so we made money every night. A lot of people would play CeeLo, and depending on who was there that night, the pots would get up to $1,000. When a few of us threw all our earnings for the night in at once, then the owner would always match. I miss that place so much. Story 83. While working, security had hidden cameras in the stockrooms looking for theft. Never caught theft, but caught employees ducking a couple times. Another time, I heard a commotion in another room and walked in on two guys in a fist fight with two other guys yelling, "World Star." Story 84. I was 18 years old working my first day at a state park. One of the vets takes me out on patrol to clean up trash. Go through as part of the trail, round the corner, and see a woman completely naked, standing up with a guy clearly eating pussy. Story 85. IIF. Worked at a small private gym in college. I wanted to get to work early one day and clean up because the night crew wasn't that great at closing up. I walked into the locker room and four of our older male trainers were in a circle, watching the owner get a BJ from his boyfriend, who helped me get the job there. What's your caught in an NSFW situation at work? I worked nights in the reception at a small hotel. Once this older guy came down with his laptop and requested help because he couldn't make his adult film work. So I had to update the guy's flash player to make his Filipino adult film work. It was a bit awkward, but I'm not going to deny some old guy his adult film. So I fixed his computer, and the dude was happy. Story 2. I was a janitor in college dorms. I worked with this 160-something dude with bad legs. One day, my supervisor walked in on him pants down, jacking it in the janitor closet. The way he tells it, they both locked eyes. Then he just turned around and left. Story 3. I was working loss prevention. I had to leave to go to my other job. I locked myself in the security office to change. Pants down in the middle of changing is when the inventory manager and general manager unlocked the door and came in. Story 4. A little over a decade ago, I was working as a quality assurance tester at Sony. Rather than slogging my way through unfinished video games, though, I was tasked with watching movies that had been released on Blu-ray, making sure that all of their various features functioned as expected when accessed on the PlayStation 4. While that might sound like an amazing job, it was actually less enjoyable than you'd think, both because I didn't get to choose what I watched, and because I'd have to endure repeated viewings for every subtitle track, alternate cut, and ill-conceived piece of commentary that was included on the discs. One day, I was assigned the movie Eyes Wide Shut. If you're unfamiliar with the film, here's what you need to know. Stanley Kubrick was, and still is, famed as being one of the most driven and detail-oriented directors to grace the silver screen. If anyone else had made Eyes Wide Shut, though, critics likely would have decried it as a filmmaker's excuse to surround themselves with dozens of naked women. There's a scene, for example, that's literally just Tom Cruise walking through a graphic sex. Each person involved is wearing a mask, but nothing else. Anyway, as with any of the films that I was assigned, I had to watch this one a half dozen times at the very least. And given that my desk wasn't the most private of locations, my screen was completely visible to anyone who might happen to pass by. Word quickly got around that I was watching adult film, which prompted my supervisor to approach me from behind. "Max, what are you doing?" he asked. I kept my eyes glued to the screen but held up the movie's case. It's Eyes Wide Shut. Oh, he stood there for a little while, staring until the manager walked over. "What are you guys watching?" "Eyes Wide Shut," we both said. Oh, over the course of about 10 minutes, my desk was slowly surrounded by the entire management team, up to and including the department head. When the sex scene finally finished, they all glanced around at each other, chuckled, then hurried off to focus on whatever work they had been neglecting. It was something of a relief for me, and not, as you might be thinking, because I didn't like having my superiors crowd around me, but because I had been seated with my head at crotch level for the entire showing. Like I said, I kept my eyes glued to the screen. Story 5? At the bottom, my old boss, who is married, has several kids, and lives a relatively successful life. Used to have a shed that had an attic that was always locked. One day I was getting some fertilizer and mulch out of the shed, and I noticed the attic door was propped open. My boss was off the property, and I decided to sneak inside to take a peek. The moment I walked up the stairs, there were two massive panels of plywood that had cutouts of nudes from Playboys and collaged together to make a giant adult wall. A little further down, he had like two magazine racks with literally hundreds of Playboys and an entire cabinet filled with VHS tapes and DVDs, like it was his Jack Shack or something. Story 6? I was caught having sex on my desk with my GF when a coworker decided to come into work on a Saturday afternoon. I should have closed my office door, but luckily they did that for me. Solid bro move. Funnily enough, I changed offices and a different coworker has that desk. Story 7? For a while, I was sort of dating our secretary. One day after work, after everyone had gone home, she came into my office and we ended up having a great time on my desk, about halfway. I picked her up and pushed her against the glazed glass wall of my office while she was straddling me. After I got tired, she turned around facing the glass and we continued until I finished. I had forgotten about the security cameras in the hallways and entrance. About 3 days later, I get to work and there is a DVD plus R on my desk with a note, "Hope you had fun." And it was of the camera that points almost directly at my office because it is on a corner. You could a lot more than I thought you could through those glazed windows. Security guy is either blackmailing me or a bro. Story 8. I don't know if this counts, but I worked for a call center a couple years ago, and when we asked someone their name, we had to say, "And who do I have the pleasure of speaking with today?" Well, for some damn reason. Why? I have no idea. I asked the lady on the phone. "And who do I have the pleasure of sleeping with today?" The girl who sits next to me looked at me wide-eyed, and then I realized what I said and apologized profusely. The lady on the phone just started cracking up and then told me her name was Marianne. Story 9. Back in the early 2000s, there was a NSFW prank floating around the internet. If you clicked at a looping video of two guys going at it, popped up on your screen, and the PC speaker squawked, "Hey everybody, I'm watching adult film." That wasn't the worst of it. If you tried to close the browser, it spawned two more and kept spawning more if you closed those. I worked in it and thought it was a hilarious prank, so I sent it to my supervisor in an email titled, "Important System Update." We always played practical jokes on each other, and this would have just been par for the course. Only problem is, he thought it was legit and sent it to the whole floor. My horror. When only a few moments later I hear it playing on one PC, then another. Almost everyone in the office had clicked the link. People panicked, turned off their systems, losing all their work. It was a huge crap show. Believe it or not, I never got fired and actually got promoted a year later. Story 10? Not me, but a past coworker. We'll call him Bob Smith. He had logged into a shared computer in our lab one day and he pulled up Outlook and then turned around to do something with his phone while Outlook loaded. Well, let me tell you, our corporate mail filter failed that day. I walk in to see Bob turned away from the screen, and on the screen in the Outlook preview pane, nearly full screened, was an email. In huge letters, Bob Smith, "Are you getting enough big black junk?" And of course, this lovely email was accompanied by a picture showing exactly what they were talking about, just in case you were unsure. I try to suppress a laugh and just say to him, "Well, Bob, are you?" He looked at me, "Am I what? What are you talking about?" I point to the screen. He can't hit that delete button fast enough. The words, "Well, are you?" with no further context for anyone else overhearing, became a running joke between us. Story 11. At my last job, there was this deaf guy who was nonverbal. The company brought in an ASL translator for every meeting, which was the only time you could really interact with him face to face. Honestly, a stand-up guy though. One day I'm in the washroom taking a dump, and I hear something strange in the stall next to me, the steady schlick of someone pleasure himself, then some grunting. So I finished up quick and left the washroom. It was just me and that guy in there. I checked his shoes, then stood outside and pretended to be on the phone. Turns out it was the deaf guy. I just smiled and waved when I saw him. From then on, I noticed that he went to the washroom for a suspiciously long time every day. I guess nobody told him that masturbating makes noise. Story 12. Used to be a lifeguard and decided to take a break to walk the dog in the bathroom. Only had some family bathrooms, not really any men or women designated areas. So I sit down and whip out the old mobile device and start yanking the chain. When all of a sudden the door begins to open up and a younger dad who doesn't know how to knock, my fault I didn't lock it, decides that he is going to walk right in. He then looks at me as I've got my junk in one hand and my phone in the other and turns to his wife, who couldn't see me, and says, Let's not use this one. It's pretty dirty. He backed out and closed the door. I've never felt so relieved, but so traumatized and a little mad, mostly because he called me dirty. Story 13. Telling my friend's story. With her permission, of course, my friend had a big interview this day. She studied nutrition in college and was interviewing with a hospital in Boston to work on their dietetics team. She went to the interview and met with the hospital worker, sat down and chatted for a bit. It was going well, so the interviewer asked if she wanted a tour of the area of the hospital she would be working in. She agreed, and the hospital was beautiful. But the interviewer seemed a bit awkward during the tour. She figured this was their way of politely ending the interview when they weren't interested, and tried to brush the awkwardness off and compensate by being more energetic, which only seemed to make the interviewer even more awkward. Finally, at the end of the tour when she was leaving, the interviewer admitted that she had a lovely sweater, but there was a lacy black thong stuck to her back from static. She'd been parading around the hospital trying to talk herself up, all the while walking around with a thong displayed for all to see. Needless to say, she didn't end up working there, and to this day jokes about how if she's ever dying and we need to send her to a hospital, how she'd rather die than be admitted there. Story 14. Only got caught peripherally in this one. One of my IT guys assigned to one of our regional offices kept getting help requests from one clerical, and most of the problems were questionable at best. She obviously just wanted to see him. One day he gets a call and goes up to her cubicle, and she's standing there with her pants off. He backed out of that, put her on his do not respond list until things could get straightened out, and then called me for help since nothing he had done was working. Since she wasn't my employee, I picked up the phone and called the regional director. The initial contact was something like, "Hi, regional?" First name basis, you know. I've always supported casual Fridays, but don't you think no pants Fridays are a little too much? Story 15. My old married, wife and kids boss had a ton of nudes on the work computer of mostly other women and occasionally himself. They were labeled mundane things like Maloney job site. Somehow he synced his personal email to the work one, and I discovered he was picking up men on Craigslist. Email subject lines like "Do BJ Daddy" are hard to ignore. He was such a miserable, nasty, explosively angry person, and went viral for a funny house selling video. Story 16. Not me, but a close friend. He worked as a vet tech, cleaning kennels, walking the dogs, changing bandages, etc. He was good friends with the boss lady, and she would bring her shepherd mix pups to stay in the kennels some weekends, especially if she was out of town or busy. One Sunday morning, he ran up to take care of the animals, and the pups were there. They loved to play, so after cleaning and caring for the other animals, he went into their run and was tossing the ball and roughhousing with these two dogs. One dog jumped on him from behind, and its paw slid into his front pocket, pulling down his pants. Right at this moment, with his pants around his ankles, one dog in front waiting and the other behind him, he realized that maybe today was not the day to go commando. Especially as his boss walks in at that precise moment to see him, with her beloved puppers hanging out in all his glory. He called me when he got home laughing and crying. His boss simply took the dogs and walked out without saying a word. Fortunately, it wasn't a rom-com movie, so he was able to explain the next day. Her only comment was, "Let's remember to wear underwear from now on, okay?" Story 17. I used to work in a call center for a major satellite TV provider. Other than the usual pervy that would call to be gross, we had one dude who would call and just make us read off adult titles. Story 18. I wasn't caught. I caught one of the supervisors of another area watching adult film on the top floor toilets at 6 a.m. I guess his headphones didn't plug properly or something. I just yelled, "Buddy, I gotta go, lower the volume." He did. I saw him after I was done washing his hands and sweating nervously. Story 19. Not quite caught, and not quite an SFW, but at work. Comfy on the bowl, popping and reading. I finish up, reach for the toilet paper, and my back completely goes out on me. It felt like somebody kicked me in the spine and I couldn't move. It took me an hour to be able to move enough to wipe and get my pants up. Another hour to hobble into my boss's office to tell her where I had been, that I was in agony, and that I needed to go to the doctor. I ended up getting prescribed a month of physical therapy and Theutic massages to get over that tragic wiping incident. Story 20. A few weeks after I started at a new company, they hired a new and very pretty secretary near me. Every dude at the office was getting shot down by her, except some guy on the second floor. The guy was your typical jacked, tan, slick hair sort of guy that can win a woman over with a smile. He won her attention, and every day I'd overhear him flirting with her hard over at her desk. Anyway, fast forward another couple months to some random work day. I need to go do a supplies run, and my boss needed some stuff too, so we take a walk over to the small supply closet. He unlocks the door and we walk in to see the secretary and this tan guy going at it hard. There was a good few seconds of us all making direct eye contact, when my boss closes the door and walks away without saying a word. I wasn't sure what to do, so just sort of go back to my desk. An hour goes by, and I still haven't seen my boss or the secretary, and I'm not sure any of my coworkers would believe it if I said anything. All of a sudden, my desk phone rings. The lady on the line is with HR and wants me in her office now. I get in there and see the secretary crying in one seat in the entrance area beside my boss, who is pale as a ghost. In an office a few feet away, the tan dude is having a screaming match with the HR woman. When I walk in, a similar moment occurred to the storage closet, and everyone froze and locked eyes. HR woman comes out of her office and has the tan dude go into her coworker's office while she invites me in to talk. All of a sudden, when I'm in the office with the HR lady, she starts breaking down crying. Sobbing and snorting everywhere. Unsure what to say or do, I ask if she's okay. She apologizes and then tells me that the tan guy is her husband. I have no idea what to do, so just kept saying, "It'll be okay," over and over. First thing that popped into my head. After a few minutes of her crying, she straightens herself out, has me confirm what my boss said happened, then told me I was good to go back to my desk. A bit later, my boss comes to my desk and tells me we're going to lunch. The moment we're in his car, he lets out this huge sigh and blankly says, "I had no idea they were married." Both the husband and secretary were fired, and the boss and I chuckled about the incident forever. I believe the HR woman ended up getting remarried, and total gossip, so who can tell if it's true. The secretary had given the tan guy herpes. What a ride. Story 21. Not me, but my coworker. He climbed up an extension ladder and climbed inside the web of an I-beam that was 8 inches from a wall that we had to fire caulk, without a harness on, 30 feet in the air. Safety bird dogging redneck ducker snuck up on me as I was spotting for him. Nothing happened because we had a labor shortage and he showed up every day. Story 22. This happened just last week. I was trying to find a stock image to use on our newest company blog post. I found one on Google Images, followed it to the original site, and clicked the download button for the high-res version. Next thing I know, I'm on the Brezzer site with 3 other new windows open on my desktop to other adult sites. I froze in horror. Lucky for me, my sound was off, and I'm in my own office with my screens facing away from the door. The image site looked so harmless, and now I know we have no restrictions on our internet at all. Edit. Obligatory thanks for my first silver, kind internet person. Story 23. I work at a hospital. I was running to a code down a long hallway towards the ICU. I carry a phone and a pager that clip onto the waistband of my scrubs that are tied with a drawstring. I guess they became untied. As seconds later, my pants were down at my ankles from the weight of the electronics. The only person who saw, thankfully, was a colleague of mine going the same way. We had a laugh afterwards. Story 24. A little bit of backstory on this one. I have an adult album on my phone. I'm not obsessed with it or anything, but sometimes the Wi-Fi goes out and I still want to end. The cover image for the album is a completely blank screen and the title is Hot. Seriously, dude, don't click on this. I figured that title and the lack of a cover image would be enough to sate the curiosity of anyone snooping on my phone so they wouldn't click on it. Now that you know this, into the story. So I was showing a coworker some pictures of a sunrise or something else cool I saw that morning, and he takes my phone to scroll through them. Then, when he gets to the end of them, he exits the album and starts looking at my other photos. At this point, I'm getting pretty nervous, but basically freeze up and don't know what to even say. I try to ask him to give me my phone back, but I can't even manage to choke out any words anymore. He looks through a couple of albums of relatively innocent stuff before seeing my good old adult album. I'm embarrassed at this point, but I figure he'll just awkwardly give me back my phone and we'll pretend this never happened, right? Wrong. I don't know the logic behind this, but he clicks on it. And in the split second before it loaded, his face had the look of, oh God, I just majorly ducked up all over it. Right as he clicks, I managed to say, "Wait, Don," before he sees around 10 or 15 images that I don't want to describe in detail. I snatched my phone from him and nervously said, sorry, and took a bathroom break to catch my breath and get away from him. When I got back, he looked at me differently, but he didn't say anything about it and we pretended it never happened. Story 25. I was working a construction job a long time ago, and I was watching this beautiful woman who was walking down the street. Gorgeous legs, a short skirt, and a low-cut blouse. I couldn't stop staring. But I probably should have because I wasn't paying attention and I got slammed in the head that was leaning against something and fell down. I was wearing my hard hat, thankfully, but I was dazed for a moment and had to sit down. It was then that I learned to appreciate work safety. Story 26. I work in IT and have for quite a while. Fairly frequently, people will ask if I can recover data from old, failed hard drives. I used to do data recovery, and generally it's a pretty task, easy to get their stuff back. Anytime anyone asks me to recover, I always make sure to let them know I'll see everything that's on that drive. Me, just so you're aware, I'll see anything that's in this hard drive. Them, yeah, okay. Me, anything. Them, got it. Me, making eye contact, every single thing. You can usually see the wheels turning at that point, trying to weigh out how important the pictures of their kids are compared to me seeing what kind of adult film they're into, or their own homemade albums. Generally doesn't stop them, though. I've recovered the HR lady's honeymoon sex video and pics. A business owner lost a bunch of accounting stuff in a drive, and I found his office manager's, his daughter, personal nudes folder. That was an awkward discussion when he got those files back. A girl in my office gave me an external drive to recover, then specifically told me to look for her nudes folder, and encouraged me to browse it and to let her know my thoughts, which I did. She's actually a quite talented boudoir photographer. Basically, half of my office, I've either seen them nude or know what kind of kinky crap they're into. When I recover their data, it all goes on an external for them to keep and sort through. All of it, every bit. I never say a word about it, I just act like it wasn't there. Occasionally, someone will ask if I saw anything weird or anything that stood out. I always reply with, nope, pretty standard stuff. In 14 years, I've had one person with 0 dirty on a recovered drive. Absolutely 0. I've never been so proud, impressed, and confused in my life. Story 27. 2 jobs ago, there was an assistant director in my division who was known for being absolutely incompetent and useless. Let's call her Jill. Jill couldn't have done the job of her direct reports with any amount of training. Naturally, the rest of us joked about how she kept her job. Realistically, it was probably because she managed the division budget and kept costs low, which meant our raises either sucked or were non-existent. And buying new hardware, software to better perform our jobs, was extremely difficult. So, Jill was pretty universally reviled. Therefore, a few of us started joking that it wasn't her tightwad budgeting that got her the position. But the fact that she'd been with the company for decades and had offered up that hairy old pussy to all the dirty old men on the top floor since the beginning. The fact that Jill was an old maid supported this, and we delighted in making up stories about how she was being used whenever she did something to piss everyone off, which was often. Fast forward to the holiday season of 2008. The company had a surprisingly good year. Its business actually benefited from the downturn and had announced a big Christmas party for the whole company, thousands, at a conference center in town. It was a big to-do, with open bars, huge meat carving stations, seafood buffets, and an army of waitstaff walking around with champagne and petit fours platters. Big cash and prize giveaways running over $1 million total value. HR bragged on the flyer. 3 live bands and a DJ in separate ballrooms, and the main stage was a well-known country act. So, with all of that, the C-level guys wanted a chance to address the crowd, to drunkenly puff up themselves in the company, and took to the main stage during the band's set break. It was pretty late, and everyone was toasted. They'd already had last call, so everyone could start sobering up for the drive home. Now, before I get to the incident, a little backstory. The CFO was not at our party. He was in New York. Our company was in the Southwest, partying with and circle-getting with other hot craps in the financial realm. Despite this, he wanted to be the one to brag to the crowd at the party about the financial numbers. Another part of my division managed video production and conferencing, and they were asked to make this possible. They recommended he pre-record a video and have it played at the party, but he insisted that they make it happen live with two-way audio and video, like they do on CNN. To make a long story less long, they miraculously got the budget approved via Jill, who with some other directors were accompanying the CFO in New York, to hire a local company in New York to set up the monitor, camera, and sound in the CFO's hotel suite. On our end, our guys set up a theater-sized projection screen and made the audio portion work with the onstage PA. Ridiculous effort for a guy to talk for 5 minutes just so he could hear and see the crowd cheering back at him. So, as many people as can be packed into the main ballroom are gathered, and the CEO gives his pep talk. All these new clients, woohoo, followed by the CIO. Successful security initiatives, yay. Then at the prearranged time, our guys get the go-ahead to turn on the feed to the CFO's hotel suite. The next few things happened extremely quickly, but it's forever burned in my memory. We are greeted by a big, white, jiggling, gyrating ass, framed by a pinstriped shirt and black slacks. We are also greeted by telltale grunts, moans, and squishing sounds. The horrified gasps and howls of laughter and applause on our side must have blasted loudly through the audio on his end, because the CFO almost immediately turned around, projecting a perfectly normal white old man junk that was nevertheless at least 6 feet large on the giant screen before he quickly stepped off camera, which revealed the backside of Jill. Couldn't mistake her huge mass of dyed orange hair for anyone else in the middle of standing up. She then also turned around to see what was happening. Not too bright, remember. Her junk flailing around in a semi-chub. You read that correctly. The howling laughter briefly turned into chatter as everyone asked each other if we'd really just seen what we thought we'd seen. To wrap up, the CFO was forced into retirement. Jill was laid off with a big severance, and the video conferencing team was raked over the coals for not calling the CFO on the phone before going live with Feed, but none of them were fired. Story 28. This happened about 10 to 12 years ago at this small, 60-people company I work for. A typical accidental reply, all instead of a forward. Not as good as other replies in this thread. Anyways, this lady replied all to something with a joke that the punchline was a picture of this girl pulling her shirt up. I've tried unsuccessfully for about 10 minutes to find the joke as I can't remember it. Maybe someone here knows what I'm talking about. So I'm sitting there, open the email, then 2 seconds later hear her screaming, "Oh no, 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 no!" It was hilarious. We're both still there, but I suppose she got a firm talking to at the time. Story 29. I was having sex with my girlfriend on and around my desk on a Sunday, office closed, and I hear the front door, which is about 20 meters around the corner from my desk, start unlocking. We both freak out. She grabs my shirt and puts it on and hides under my desk to change, leaving me to walk up to the front door shirtless while my boss walked in and explained to him that I needed a second. He waited at the front door for about 2 minutes with the biggest crap-eating grin on his face, trying not to burst out laughing, as my GF came around the corner fully dressed and had me introduce her to my boss. He teased me about it for a bit, but I think he found it hilarious. Never told him I had sex on his desk, but I'll always know that there were butt cheeks on his keyboard. Story 30. At Bottom worked at an amusement park during high school and was dating a fellow employee. Everyone dated everyone there. We would usually have sex in my car after work at a secluded spot about 15 mins away. However, she had to be home in a timely manner one night, so we didn't have time to go to the spot. Thus, my high school horny self decided that we would probably be fine pulling in behind a shed next to the parking lot of amusement park. Turns out that it wasn't fine. Mid-bone, there was a knock on the window, followed by a long pause as I feared the worst. Then the amusement park security guard then asked me to open the door, to which I said, "Can I please put pants on first?" He chuckled as he said yes. Then we were put in the back of his car and driven back to the security office where they called both of our parents. We were placed in separate rooms with no doors. Mine was the first room in the hallway. Her parents arrived first. I had never met her parents, and they had to walk past my room in order to get to her room. As her father passed by the door, I received a stare of death more intense than I could ever imagine. During the next 15 minutes, as I awaited the arrival of my parents, I contemplated if I was going to be murdered by my own family, or if her dad was going to get me first. My mom finally arrives, and I am allowed to leave the security office. I think that I am going to be in serious trouble and have a calm before the storm feeling in my gut. The first thing my mom says to me is, "Yeah, I kind of guessed things were getting hot and heavy when I saw all those hickeys on your neck." On the drive home, I am wondering if she's just leaving the ass blasting to my dad. When I get home, Dad is already asleep, so I just go to bed. Next day, I am in my room and awaken to my dad knocking on the door. I think to myself, here it is, I'm ducked. He comes in and says, "Here, I think you could use this," and hands me a box of condoms and a book titled The Joy of Sex by Dr. Alex Comfort. He then leaves the room, and nothing else was ever said about it. I was blown away, but I was still sure that I would be fired from my job after doing this. Regardless, I went into work the next day. There's a gate outside the amusement park where you scan in. If you are fired, your badge won't work, and they will send someone out to get you and officially fire you. To my complete astonishment, badge swipes right away, and I just go to work like it's another day. Every day following, I always get nervous as they swipe my badge, but it worked every time. I guess they were just that desperate for employees. I never saw or talked to the girl again, though. Story 31. Got busted having sex with a serve in the wine liquor storage room on the opening night of a new bar in town. I was working there only that night to ensure the bar ran smoothly. When I was done, I sat down next to a nice server. She and I talked about our jobs in the past and what would come of this place. We agreed that there'd be a lot of banging be done by the staff, and we started sharing our stories of having sex at work with people from work. At one point, I mentioned who'd be the first people to have sex in this place. She suggested it could be us, so we decided it should be us. We thought the liquor storage room would be the best place because it's in the staff area. You need a code to get into the staff area and another to access the booze room, so not many people would be able to enter and we'd hear them coming. Or so we thought. One of the night managers enters, sees us, says, "I'm just here for vodka. Please don't knock over the shelves," and she left. All in all, a pretty cool experience. We had some beers after and had a laugh about our accomplishment. Story 32. This happened to me yesterday. I was at a BBQ with some coworkers and friends, and we were all tossing a football around on the grass. Ball comes to me, I go for a slight dive, and then I hear this savage rip throughout my shorts. Everything ripped, and all my junk fell out in front of everyone. One homie was a team player and gave me his sweater to use as a kilt for the rest of the day. Story 33. I was walking past my office at midnight with my girlfriend and decided we should go in and have sex in the lounge. On Monday, my boss comes in swinging. a pair of panties around his fingers saying, "No one is in trouble, but we will need an explanation over a beer later." I was so pissed at my GF. How the duck do you not remember to put your panties back on? Story 34. I was at work. We were closed, and I was the only one still there. We close at 2 p.m., and sometimes delivery guys forget and still show up to drop off packages. I'd just gone to the bathroom and put a small sex toy in my panties, walked out, and the doorbell rang. Without thinking, I went to the front and opened the door. I kind of froze when the delivery guy walked in and started toward the back, where they usually leave the packages. Because I'm standing there, and you can hear the buzzing, I had to follow him so that I could sign for the package once he dropped it off. I'm not sure if he heard it buzzing, but it was super quiet in there with no one around. So I'm fairly certain he did. What makes this worse is that I'm the regional director, so if he mentioned it to anyone else the next time he delivered, he would be mentioning it to my direct reports. No one ever said anything to me about it. Another time, I was texting my boyfriend and one of my employees at the same time. I messaged my BF telling him, "I really need some junk." A couple of hours later, he hadn't responded to that particular message. So I looked at my messages to be sure I sent it and noticed it wasn't in my message history with him. Sudden realization hits. So I checked my texts with my employee and sure crap, I had sent it to her. I immediately sent her an apology message, and she responded back saying that she and her wife were at Kohl's when she got the message and that she busted out laughing and decided not to respond, but to let me figure it out on my own that I had ducked up. Good thing she's a lesbian and not a male employee, or that could have been very bad. Story 35. I had to change a bunch of light bulbs above a staircase. I found a box that was just the right height, so I put the box on one stair and balanced the ladder on the box and the upper stair. My supervisor saw me and told me it wasn't safe. Story 36. I worked at a small zoo, rescue in New York. We didn't have a lot of large exotic animals, but we were ASA accredited, so there is that. I was working on a cloudy day going around doing this and that, and it began to rain. We had a large area where the marmosets would hang out outside, with a small tunnel that they could use to get back inside to their interior habitat. Generally, when it rained, we would keep them inside. But I always let them take themselves inside when it rained because they always would, and because they could be a pain to wrangle inside and get the tunnel door shut so that they couldn't go back out. Anyway, I was the only main keeper on duty besides some volunteers, so I had gone around and helped out some of the other animals and got them set up for the rain. But as I passed the marmoset habitat, they were still outside, and I swear they were giving me this really funny look, like something odd was up in their world. They also kept moving like they were about to head inside, but then would lean the other way and stay on their branch. Honestly, I figured that someone had shut their interior door already and shut them out. It would have been a kind of an odd mistake because when the marmosets were inside where you could shut the door from, it was pretty obvious. But it was all I could think of because the marmosets themselves were pretty predictable with things like weather. So I circled around inside and immediately was confronted with my issue. 2 volunteers were having sex in the interior cage. They weren't just messing around, it was full-on sex. Hands up on money bars and I think a foot on the cage. Who knows? It was a cluster. The turner between the indoor and outdoor exhibits wasn't even shut. The marmosets just apparently wanted nothing to do with that. I don't blame them. Thinking back to the marmosets' faces when I asked them what was up, I like to assume that I had a similar look on my face when confronted with the problem inside. To anyone concerned, the little guys weren't too wet, and I got them in quickly after that. They also got some sweet pineapple and an enrichment box that they could play with to help them move past their earlier dilemma. Story 37. Worked at a third-party call center, which in itself has enough stories to fill this thread. But this story is mine. I met my current, so they're about 5 years ago. We spent a few months flirting and getting to know each other through company Skype and email and finally hooked up one night at her place. At this point in our lives, neither of us had a car, so our mobility was limited. Anyway, it was the day after we hooked up for the first time and we were pretty eager to get back at it. After our shift ended, we were going to wait for a bus home when she dragged me down an alleyway next to our office building and to the underground parking garage. So after a few minutes of her riding me, we hear, "Excuse me?" and see a security guard watching us. He proceeded to watch us while she dismounted me, and we got proper again. He had us follow him to the security office, scolding us the whole way, which of course we deserved. We were absolutely mortified and ashamed that we let our hormones get the better of us. We told him which company in the building we were employees of and gave him our info. He told us he would think about not telling anyone since we were so respectful and let us go. Sure enough, the next day we both get called to HR separately and both had pretty much the same convo. HR asked us why we didn't just use our vehicle or drive home, and we explained our situation and acknowledged how dumb we were. Anyway, in the end, HR told us since it was not on company time or company property, parking garage was for the building the call center was in, but not the call center itself. There would be no disciplinary action, and it would not be factored into our future in the company, and no one would be told. Well, of course, everyone found out, and I kept getting nods of nice from coworkers. But that was the most that came from it. I wouldn't take it back, but I would not repeat. Story 38. I had joined a new job along with my now ex, GF, back in 2010. We were part of a 20-strong batch of new employees undergoing a month-long training session. We had multiple trainers, but one of them was especially cute and bubbly. Let's call her Elle. The training room was a large rectangular room with 10 computers along the 2 longer walls. It had a whiteboard projector screen in the front with a floor-to-ceiling curtained glass panel as the last wall. My GF would always sit in the front, and I preferred sitting at the last computer in the right-hand row. I was kind of smitten by her because she would always have a smile on whenever it was my turn for a presentation or to give an answer. One day, we were going through a long instructional video in the darkened training room. Everyone was struggling to stay awake after 15 minutes into the hour-long corporate video. Elle was standing to the side near the screen, but as she did not have a chair to sit on, she walked to the back of the room and stood beside my chair, with her back resting against the wall. A couple of minutes later, I feel someone brushing my hair. I used hard styling gel for my then short hair. I quickly turned my head around and saw her smiling at me as she touched my hair. Before I could react, Morel said something to the effect of nice hair and smiled at me. I turned around and pretended to watch the video as Elle continued to run her fingers through my hair. It was an immensely arousing moment, and I was glad the room was dark and my GF hadn't bothered to turn around. Story 39. I am the IT director for a large aerospace company. The first year I worked here, the first major project was completely outfitting the new production facility about 30 miles away that all of us on the management team were to be based out of. It was designed to be a showpiece for visiting execs from Boeing, Airbus, etc. I had finished months of work and had outfitted the server room and the rest of the facility, had the network extended from the main plant via fiber hardware VPN, and the executive conference room, which was swanky with a massive 20 feet long marble table and an 80 LCD screen, was the final part that was completed. The table had been modified to have these pop-up interfaces that had HMDI, power, and USB at 3 places on the table. Myself and the owner of the company, and the interior decorator, who was a really proper older lady as well. The contractor who did the wiring were in there so I could test the configuration in the ports. My GF and I were in a phase where we were taking iPhone pics during sex, and my phone backed the photos up to my laptop. Of course, this was the furthest thing from MuMind when I plugged in my laptop, and in glory, the last pic my GF had taken 2 days prior. My hard junk shot from below, taking up the entire screen with my face in the upper corner. Immediately, my insides jumped. The contractor yelled, "Get it off!" I'm like, "I'm trying!" and pulled the HDMI out and noticed that the company owner and interior decorator were facing the opposite corner discussing something. They turned around and missed it, thankfully. I acted like it was a malware pop-up, but me and the contractor both knew what was up. Every time I saw that contractor, for as long as we used his company, we laughed about it. Had the rest of the management team been around at night, have cost me a lot more than a little embarrassment. Story 40. I was tech support for a web hosting company, 1U1 if you must know. Call clicks off, next call connects. I go through the motions of, "Thank you for calling, blah blah, could I take your account number please?" I tap in the number. "And your name?" "Thank you. Good afternoon, Miss Smith. Could you just confirm the domain name you're calling about today?" That question was asked because a fair few customers have multiple domains registered, and I'm busy typing notes on the previous call and haven't even looked at her account yet. "Oh," she says. Can't you see it at your end?" "Well, yes, but I generally ask the caller to confirm just so we're clear which account has the problem and there's no confusion. I still haven't seen the domain name in the account. So I take a look. Okay, so it's, okay, she volunteers in a half whisper. "Okay then, and what seems to be the problem today?" I reply as I click the URL and realize I'm being paid to look at adult film. Story 41. Wasn't my work, but when I visited my ex-wife at work, she decided to have sex in her SUV. We're both tall, and it was a chaotic process, really, haha. Where we parked, we thought it was safe. But unbeknownst to us, it's where the security guards go to take smoke breaks, and we got caught. They were cool, told us just get dressed and leave, which we did. Story 42. A customer accidentally opened a hot video in a restaurant that I was working in after her friend linked it to her. She left her phone on max volume, and when the adult community theme played, I had a really hard time controlling my laughter. Story 43. I accidentally left a DVD in my laptop of a movie with a very specific theme. Not exactly adult film, but only people with that specific hot interest would know about it or recognized it because there was no cover art, and the title isn't hot. So given that, when I brought my laptop to work and realized I left it inside, I just put it halfway through the stack of CDs on my desk with intention to take it home later. I forgot. Flash forward a week. I come into work and the DVD is at the top of the stack. I was mortified but slightly excited because whoever did it recognized the movie and clearly left it there for me to see. I put it back in the middle of the stack. The next day, it was back at the top. This went on for days until I finally brought it home because I came to my senses and realized it was super risky. During this whole time, I was snooping around the office trying to find out who it was. I had a huge crush on one of my coworkers, and there was certainly chemistry between us. But he was in a relationship, hoped it was him, but never figured out any useful intel. Flash forward again 6 months or so. Coworker is no longer in a relationship. We start dating. I find out he was the one putting the movie on the top of the stack. Flash forward 8 years to today. We are about to celebrate our 5-year wedding anniversary. Sex is still great. Story 44. I was working late one night with my back-then girlfriend, now wife. We were alone, and she moved her laptop to work next to me in my office. Glorified title for a slightly bigger desk facing the other desks of the team, so it was an open office with no walls. Long story short, we ended having sex over my desk, pushing papers out of the way for dramatic effect, and everything went fine. Except that a few days later, my boss very casually tells me, "You know, I installed security cameras. Just be careful when working late." Story 45. A new girl completed her trial shift and was invited to the Christmas party because the owner thought it would be a good way for everyone to get to know her. I, her manager, spent the majority of the night hanging out with her, and we later went home and slept together. We thought we had been discreet when leaving the party, but apparently our drunken selves weren't as subtle as we thought, and everyone knew the next day. Naturally, she was mortified and was freaking out, but I was able to reassure her that it would blow over, and I wouldn't treat her any different to any of the other employees. She happily worked there for another 2 years before moving back to the US. Story 46. This one doubles as an excellent, no, it really isn't what it looks like. Doing field work in Oklahoma, aka the deer tick capital of the world. Had been picking the little gits off me all day, and had already had Rocky Mountain spotted fever once that summer. None of my other female crewmates were home when I got, so I grabbed lone male crewmate and asked him to check my back for ticks. Turns out his girlfriend was coming down to visit that weekend, and she got in a little early, and walked in to see me, bent over a table with the back of my shirt pulled up and my bra unclasped, and her boyfriend's nose about an inch from my back. Cue 2 sets of horrified deer and headlights expressions. I told that story at their wedding a couple weeks ago, so I don't think I screwed anything up too badly. Story 47. I'm a photographer. I was doing a photo shoot for a beauty clinic, and the service I was shooting was an orange skin reduction in the upper thighs. So the model comes out of the changing room with a robe from the clinic, and when we were discussing the shoot and giving directions, she dropped the robe on purpose and was completely naked and cool with. She starts asking me directions completely naked and moving around the space. This was a fit girl with an awesome body, and I genuinely felt like in an adult film. Story 48. I used to fix cell phones. The worst is when somebody wanted you to see their nudes. They would accidentally open gallery when handing it to me. A lot of less scrupulous techs would look through the gallery for nudes when it was a hot chick. I could get that crap for free online, and I didn't want to risk pissing off a customer. I didn't get paid enough for that crap, so I avoided that. But when you were doing data transfers, sometimes you couldn't get around seeing it. We also had a dude come in periodically with literal crap clogging up his phone, one of those Kyocera waterproof flip phones. He was a local playwright, and I found out later a friend of my grandpa. Pretty sure he was shoving it up his ass. I don't know how else you routinely get crap embedded into your keypad. Boob sweat damaged phones. Women would come in the summer, pull their phone straight from their cleavage and hand it over. We would open it up, and there would be rancid boob sweat inside, a clear, brownish yellow fluid. It smelled damn terrible. Still not as bad as horse piss girl, though. We went through a lot of hand sanitizer. Story 49. Once when I was working as a tech, a guy brought his desktop in for me to take a look at. He said it was running slow. Okay, it probably is just on an old version of Windows and needs updates. I see this all the time. When I turn his computer on, his wallpaper is a scantily clad lady in a provocative pose, and his desktop is covered with adult film folders. I pretend to ignore it and be professional, but he obviously is acting sheepish. Funny part is that the monitor was positioned in such a way that other customers in the store might have been able to see what was on his screen. So he definitely noticed me angle it away from anyone being able to see his screen. Alternatively, back when I was in fast food, a car of girls came through my drive-thru at like 1 in the morning, obviously all very drunk. They asked for like 100 chicken nuggets, which is a pretty standard drunk person order. So I reply, "Okay, what kind of sauce would you like with your nuggets?" They say something very quietly back into the radio, which I couldn't hear. So I say, "Okay, hang on, just come up to the window and tell me what sauce you want." I couldn't quite hear that. They roll up to the window, and the girl in the driver's seat says, with a perfectly straight face, that the sauce she wants for her nuggets is my semen. We all busted out laughing. I didn't smash, though. Story 50. Used to work in a combination cafe, bar, restaurant. Came in at 6 a.m. to open up the cafe portion of the business to discover the bar is a total mess. Empty wine bottles and broken glasses everywhere. All the beer taps sticky. a half-empty bottle of tequila, which we have never sold, sitting on the side, etc. Go into the office to drop off my bag and find our head chef asleep in his underwear. Wake him up, and he mutters something about not meaning to stay so late and bolts out of the place. Thoroughly confused and anticipating backlash from head office. If I don't work out what the heck is going on, I decide to check the cameras and see. Married, head chef, and also married, but not to each other, restaurant manager getting wasted, trashing the place, and having sex at about 2 a.m. the previous night. Story 51. Towards the end of my shifts, I have to clean the bathrooms. I knock on the women's room and ask if anyone is in there. With no response, I walk in to clean. I find one of my women co-workers flicking her bean in the handicap stall. It was awkward, but she didn't stop. She left the job shortly after. Story 52. I work in unemployment, and we frequently have to send adult film pictures to the state showing what our clients' ex-employees were looking at work that caused them to get fired. One of my co-workers sent me a funny case they were working on, and since our system is extremely outdated, it freezes constantly. Of course, it froze on one of the adult film pictures right as my manager walked up to talk to me. 2 people stood up to talk to her and got a full view of it, and the manager of the person that sent it to me happened to walk up to talk to my manager at the same time. So now I've got adult film frozen on my screen with 4 people around my cubicle. Luckily, this is a completely normal occurrence at my job, so my 60-year-old lady manager just said, "Oh dear, another one?" And everyone laughed it off. Didn't make it any less awkward for me though. Story 53. I used to be a bouncer at a bar in college. One night I was stationed outside the washroom beside the stage, overlooking the dance floor. One girl was visiting the washroom far too frequently and started grazing up against me. So I took the hint and we started talking. After she made it clear she wanted to get ducked right there, and realizing I wasn't going to be off work for a few hours, I took her to the basement, where the manager's office is, and we have a small lounge with couches for after-hours activities. However, one of the busboys noticed us on the couch without recognizing me and told the owner 2 drunk people were hooking up in the basement. He comes downstairs and yells before entering the room, which scared me into leaping up. He entered to see my fully junk swinging like a doorstopper spring and shielded his eyes like he had accidentally stared at the sun. We still laugh about it to this day. Story 54. I used to go into a storage area to read during my lunch breaks at an old job. It was split into several smaller areas, but there were half walls. They didn't go all the way up to the ceiling between them. People came in from time to time, but rarely into the rear room where I sat, so if the door opened, I never paid it any mind. One time I heard someone come in and go into the adjacent room. I just kept reading. A few minutes later, I heard a second person come in. You can guess the rest. Just imagine graphic BJ sounds, and me huddled in the adjacent room. They left separately, so the scene ends with me trying not to breathe on the other side of a wall, probably no more than 4 feet away from a coworker cleaning up her chin. I knew who they were. I heard them talking, but never told either of them I'd been in there. Story 55. Having sex with my GF while upstairs at work. Repair guy crept upstairs and damn near saw some action on Mao. I think he knew all along. Him coming upstairs just confirmed it. He didn't say anything to boss. Not like it would have made a diff though. Our son was probably conceived at that point. Story 56. When I coached soccer at the high school I teach at, I used to have to change in whatever free room I could find. We had no facilities to ourselves, 6 schools in one building. And the actual practice facilities were 2 miles away by bus and out in the open. So I had to change in my classroom or a colleague's free classroom. The bathroom was never an option. It's a mess, and I can't lock the door. I need to be able to lock the door, obviously. I locked the door every time and rarely had any interruptions. Until testing week. Teachers also look for open rooms in which to conduct testing. I found an available room to change, and about 30 seconds into changing, with my pants coming off and me very much in a bad look, I hear, "Oh, look, we'll go in here," from the voice of a colleague. I hear the key enter the tumbler, and without thinking too much, I bellow, "Nope," as loudly as I can. I'm a tall man with a deep voice. My colleague paused, and I heard, "Let's try another room," student name, and footsteps away from me. That was the closest call ever. Story 57. So I work for an ad agency, and one of my clients is this super funky brand, and their legal and marketing team is super lax in terms of approvals. They were willing to put out all sorts of weird content if it resulted in sales growth. For the longest time, I've wanted to advertise on Adult Hub. It's one of the most trafficked sites in the world, and I knew we could get a deal done for really cheap, relatively speaking. Finally, the brand's legal and marketing teams oblige, and I go out to work a deal with Adult Hub. Like I thought, it was super cheap. We got great placements, and essentially we're the only video pre-roll advertiser for a few consecutive days. I'm not even sure if it's possible to be the only advertiser on any other top trafficked site in the world, and it definitely would insanely expensive. This was a bargain. Anyways, we're negotiating with Adult Hub, and they sent us a preview of what the ad would look like on screen. They sent us a screenshot, and while the ad is the main video on the screen, The rest of the image is the uncensored preview thumbnails of hardcore film. That was a tough one to explain to my coworkers. Story 58. I used to work night shift at Subway as the main closer. I was getting a bit too comfortable with a coworker. We'd play grab ass and make out on occasion. I take food safety seriously, so we wash hands and such. And this so happened to be a slow night, and we were working and flirting about. I noticed she put a stack of bread forms, what you put in the pan and the dough into before it goes in the oven, up on an out-of-place high shelf. Cute or not, I told her to move them to the appropriate place like a good closer. But she must have forgotten because the store manager was fed up with them being left in obscure places and checked the cameras to find the culprit. She and everyone on shift at the time got a show from what I hear. The monitor for the cameras is in the back room, kitchen for all to see. We both got suspended for about a week, and we stopped the foolery at work from then on. The embarrassment coming back was a bit for us, but we made do. Story 59. Not quite work, but in small college. One of the bathrooms has a motorized door for handicap. The annoying thing is that it has to swing all the way open, and then all the way closed before you can push a button that locks it. Being new to the building, I was not aware of this. My girlfriend at the time wanted me to send some nudes to her, so I whip it out and start working to get it up while watching some adult film on my phone. Naturally, right then, the door starts to swing open and in walks one of my classmates, never spoken to. I panic, try to hide my junk and hit the lock on my phone but miss and just crank up the volume. The door is finally swung all the way open and she just stands there staring at me cupping my junk while trying to silence the girl on my phone screaming harder. The door swung closed. I quietly took my nude, walked back to class, and we never spoke of it. Story 60. I used to work at a fry shack here in town at the mall. And one day there was a snowstorm, so there was hardly anyone in mall. But for some reason, it was still opened. Anyways, there was 3 people working. 2 employees and the boss's daughter. The boss's daughter and one of the employees started doing the dirty in the back room on a container of fries while the other employee was left out front. Story 61. I was working as a lactation consultant, and I was writing an educational module for nurses. I wanted to find an image of a certain breast shape, which I knew was a sift-through adult film activity. I actually have zero interest in adult film. I don't look at it, my browser history is boring. But my friend walked into my office after a risky click, and I was like a teenager trying to close windows and turn my laptop as she walked to my desk. I think she thought I was looking at adult film. Story 62. Was a store manager for GameStop in my early 20s in Vi. There was this trashy but passable New Jersey woman with the accent and all who was incredibly incompetent, but managed to fail upwards repeatedly until she was a store manager at a large store. One day, she got fired out of nowhere along with her assistant manager and a store manager who was there to help her with an upcoming inventory because the store had shrink issues. It was weird because they all got fired before the inventory. And the other store manager was not even from the area. So I asked my DM about it. They reviewed the security footage, and one night she'd do BJ them both off before they double-teamed her in the back of the store in the middle of prepping for inventory later that week. 21-year-old me really wanted to see that footage. Story 63. This was this Christmas gone. I work at a cinema, went into an auditorium to clean after a film had just finished. There was a couple, mid-teens, in the top right well after the credits had finished. I could just see the girl's head bobbing up and down over the dude's crotch. For some reason, they hadn't thought maybe to stop at the sound of the doors opening or the cleaning lights coming on. The guy made eye contact with me and immediately nudged the girl to stop. I did a 180 to avoid any more awkward BJ eye contact. They followed shortly after and left, red-faced the whole time. To top it off, this had been the Grinch.